The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
It is with Michael Coleman, and I'm Tony Kurre, his co-host. We do a show called Mission Minded. Keep your mind, your mission, your mind here. It's March 23rd. Of 2026, our second week. Michael, let's bow our heads and get into it here in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, thank you so much for this other beautiful day today. Please mold us and shape us into the soldiers of Jesus Christ like we were made to be. Let our biblical wisdom, we're getting into biblical wisdom today. Let our biblical wisdom come to our lips briskly yet gently. Help us do that through anchoring leadership in a humility type of way. Prayer for reliance on you, God, and of course the application of that scripture rather than the mere human understanding. Please help us value people over their task and embrace your godly character and seeking the Holy Spirit's guidance for the discernment to make decisions that honor God and honor you every single day. Please let us keep that biblical discernment in our heads and our biblical wisdom on the top of our lips throughout this entire show. And we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
How you doing there, partner? Did you have a nice weekend?
Yeah, got some stuff done, but was really looking forward to talking with you today and kind of transitioning into this leadership and leading with biblical wisdom and how all that fits together, and starting our second week. And I'm real excited. We got some feedback and some questions, and just couldn't wait to get at it.
MissionMinderRadio@gmail.com, MissionMinderRadio@gmail.com. You can drop your emails there. And, of course, so we've had thousands of folks who have found us on Tony Kurre Radio, a little format that I put together about 4 or 5 years ago. It's Mission Minder Radio out there. So you can now hear that show right here on 101.1 The Truth. You can also call us anytime, 941-1011, 941-1011, 941-1011. If you've got anything you want to bring to the show, any questions, even if it's not mainstream, just let us know what you want to get into. If it's something that we're not really talking about at the time, we can stop and we can always get back to what we're doing. We'll get some emails in there as well today. And I thought I'd bring this up a little bit because, I'm a rock and roll kind of guy. You know how, we go back like 40 and 50 years. People are like, 50 years ago this happened. I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm getting old. I'm getting old. I heard today that 70 years ago today, Elvis Presley had the number one album on the Billboard Top 100. And what makes that crazy, it was the first rock and roll album ever to be ranked number one. Isn't that crazy?
That is, and I got to be honest with you. I was coming up and learning to appreciate music as Elvis was fading out. And when I say fading out, that's a relative term. But, just with new music. Yeah, I mean, I remember riding down, I was in the backseat of the car. It was announced over the radio. I was with my dad, my stepmother. She starts crying. She was actually raised just right outside of Memphis, and was a huge Elvis fan. And so it really affected her. And I really didn't get that at the time because, I know he's a big deal, but I didn't have the full appreciation that I do now as an adult looking back over his career.
Well, the music, I guess I can go back and look at Elvis Presley as one of the reasons I got into radio. I try to always remember the trailblazers and the people that came before me. I get into Marconi and get into the audio tubes and all that kind of stuff and Ship to Shore and how that all started radio, because I want to know the history of why I do what I do. But the fact that 1955 or 1956 in this particular case was the first year that we actually had a record that was deemed rock and roll to be number one overall, just kind of tells you where we're going. Of course, then we had the British invasion, and next thing you know is the Beatles and the Stones, and also, amazingly enough, on this date in 1962, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards played for the first time together in England back in 1962, and I think Keith was he was 83 then. He was pushing the 70s back then. But
I
it's funny.
I got to be honest with you. Seeing Keith Richards and Willie Nelson still alive, as much weed as they smoke, it's really got me rethinking the whole. I need to diet and exercise more often.
Keith admitted to snorting his own dad's ashes. For gosh sakes, I mean, I'm all about having a good time, but that's a little beyond me.
That's a little twisted.
It's interesting because I mean, we went from, remember, the cameras weren't allowed to go below the hips, the whole 9 yards. The Rolling Stones, Speak of the Devil, they couldn't sing "Let's Spend the Night Together." They had to say, "Let's spend some time together" when they were on the Sullivan Show. I mean, so I want to say we have come a long way, but we haven't come a long way.
No, we've deteriorated further.
Yeah, I think we have. But that's amazing, 70 years ago today. All right, so we're talking about biblical wisdom and how to lead with that. And we're going to get into that the entire week. Last week we did a whole week on gratitude, which was great because I think it was just a very gratifying week. And we also want to thank our friend Mark Davis, who joined our show on Thursday as well. Lots of email questions here, info at Tony Curry Radio, and also missionminderradio@gmail.com. Let me start off with the first question, and that is to Michael Coleman. How do we use biblical wisdom and lead with that biblical wisdom and do it in a workplace, particularly in 2026 where, quite frankly, I mean, we used to go into radio and I could pray wherever I wanted. No one said a word. Now I'm not so sure I wouldn't be stepping on someone's toes. But how do we lead with that biblical wisdom without stepping on any toes, or should we even care?
Well, I think there's a right way to do it, but to me, biblical, when you talk about leadership, it really starts with just a full examination of ourselves. It's been my experience that when people lead well, you don't have to worry about compelling people to follow you. And so I really look at biblical leadership in terms of what is it, how is it that you're approaching it? How do you view your role? And I'm going to touch on different things throughout the week. And so, we obviously don't have to cover it all today. But one of the things I think is just really is vital is it starts with humility and teachability. And, I've been a CEO now at different organizations since 2012. And so if we're going on for 14 years, and I've had leadership positions throughout the Army and other places as well. So I've been in leadership positions basically my entire adult life. And I've learned some hard lessons on leadership. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had to learn through failure in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I've noticed in myself, and I think this is a very biblical principle, is how pride can blind leaders. Mm-hmm. We know what the Bible says about people who are proud, and that we should not take pride in who we are. We should not take pride in what we do. I think Jesus speaks to the idea that, when you think you're doing something great, your attitude should be, I'm just a humble servant, because who we are doesn't compare to who Jesus is. So when you have an opportunity to lead, when I've been put in charge of an organization, before I give out the first set of instructions or before I issue out the first directive, I really need to take inventory about who I am, what my motives are, what I'm trying to accomplish, whose life am I trying to better? Is it my life, or is it the life of other people? And so a couple of things that will come out, I think, in the next hour are things that lots of times people either aren't used to seeing in leaders, or if they do, it's just much more rare. And let me just throw one out right now. One is as a leader, I had to learn how to invite dissent. So, Tony, tell me about all the times you've worked in radio, and I think you said your very first job was a KFC. How often did the manager or the leader come say, Tony, I really want you to tell me what's wrong?
Well, at Kentucky Fried Chicken, it actually happened quite a bit. I was only 15, but I started radio when I was 12, and I was already getting paid. But Kentucky Fried Chicken was really that first job that I, if you want to, it was my first formal job. But it was we had an amazing staff. I'll be honest with you, we had an amazing staff there. We were really, really tight. A friend of mine, Joey Mulberg, who was the one that got me my first job. But I always took direction very well. I was very obedient. I really respected and listened to authority. Police officers scared the bejeebers out of me. I hated going to the principal's office. Was one of those kids that never really got into trouble a lot. So I tried to keep myself high and dry and clean and mean. And so, if the boss ever asked me something, I just kind of keep my mouth shut and kind of do my work. I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for, but I would imagine a lot of bosses probably don't ask that question, I think is where you're going.
Well, and forgive me, I think my internet connection's kind of popping in and out. So if you miss me, you're popping in and out on me, and I think it's on my end. I apologize to our audience. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you that the best leaders I had in the military were people who invited me to give an honest opinion of how I felt things were going. And as I was coming up through leadership,
that was in the military. I mean,
yes, even in the military.
So when I forgive me if I'm wrong, Sergeant, I'm trying to think of someone that would be higher than you were at that time. Came to you. I mean, it almost sounds like something out of the movie Stripes, where if they say, "Well, tell me how you feel, Michael. Just tell me exactly. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me exactly how you feel, my man." And you're probably like, "Well, now that you've asked, yes, sir."
Well, I'm going to tell you something that happened actually before 9/11. So it was about 26 years ago. Before I went into command. So for those listening who will understand or have this perspective, I spent about half my time enlisted. Went to officer candidate school, got my commission. So this is later in my career, and I got my company command. But before that, I was a brigade adjutant. And best way to think about that is I was the human resource director for an organization of about 1,500, and it was air defenders out at Fort Bliss, Texas. And my brigade commander, my office was directly across the hall from his. And we answered to a rapid deployment unit, 18th Airborne Corps. I don't want to get too much in the weeds. But this man had an MBA from Stanford University. He was brilliant. He was a colonel. His brother was already over West Point, was a 3-star general. He was obviously going to make general. But he walked out one time, and let me tell you, I was a lieutenant. I was working in a major's position. I was a lieutenant. And I made lots of mistakes, and he was always very patient with me. But one day he came out of the office, and he said, "Michael, I need," and I don't even remember what the statistic was, but I didn't have it at my fingertips. Mm-hmm. And he said, "I need it, and I need it now." And I'm like, "Sir, I'll get it for you." And he goes, "Never mind, I'll find it myself." And he walked out. And what, unbeknownst to me, was that there were people at Fort Bragg calling him. I mean, this was something going on behind the scenes that was important. And I didn't have that information for him. And 10 minutes later, I got a call, and he said, "Michael, I want to apologize to you. It's not your fault. I shouldn't have yelled at you." Wow. And I was like, "Sir, you don't have to apologize to me." I mean, but so here's somebody at a very high level. I was at a very low level. And the fact that he took the time in the midst of all that stress of whatever he was dealing with to say, "You know what, it bothers me that I talk to somebody that way. That's not appropriate. That's not who I want to be. That's not the culture I want to build." And he took the time, and I looked at him as somebody superior to me in every single way. I mean, smarter, better officer. I'll never even begin to reach his height. And he called and apologized for nothing. He didn't curse at me or anything else. He didn't say I'm a loser. He just yelled at me. And that was, I mean, here I am 26 years later talking about it. That's the impact that it had on me. And I think the best leaders start with the idea of humility, recognizing that they can be wrong, recognizing that their way is not always the best way. And I thought about that. I'm like, well, why is it that people hesitate to do that? Well, when you have more authoritative people, they're like, it's my way or the highway, and they don't want any feedback. And when I see that, I instantly think about people who are underneath all of that very insecure. And look, I'll be honest with you. I call my directors around all the time, and I say, this is where we've landed on this. This is what I want to get done. This is the way that I think is the best way to do it. But I really want your feedback. And almost inevitably, we end up changing some aspect of the plan that I come up with because it's better.
Yeah.
And so I start with the idea of, okay, yes, what's my purpose? Well, my purpose is to serve the people that I can serve in the best way possible. And I'm not the keeper of all good ideas. I have a role in that, but so does the rest of my staff. And in the past, there's been times to where I'm like, I don't want to hear any other ideas, out of maybe some insecurity or fear that I'm not going to look like the smartest person in the room. I had to come to terms with the fact I'm usually not the smartest person in the room. And so when you start from that position of humility, it's so much easier to get other people's opinions and buy-in. And that's just, I get it, that's just one aspect of humility. But I think it allows other people to have buy-in rather than lifting myself up. I will tell you, it just popped in my head in the book of James. When people say, James was talking about people who come in dressed very nice, and you, oh, sir, we have a great seat for you down front. Mm-hmm. We tend to do that. He said, basically, this is obviously a paraphrase, but just summing up the situation is, don't assume that you're in a place of prominence, because it's really embarrassing when somebody's prominent comes in and then they move you out of that place of prominence. You need to start from the position of, well, I'm just going to sit back here in the back. And then if they move you forward, great, if they want to recognize you, but just being in a place of, and it's really the difference in an entire mindset of people who enter into situations, starting with, yes, I'm a leader. Yes, I acknowledge that. Yes, I want to be effective. But to be effective, I have to be open-minded and listen to others. Now, I get, when you get feedback, lots of time, that takes more time. Lots of times you're going to get some crazy stuff. But ultimately, in a culture, you want people to be free to speak their mind and come to you when they feel like that your solutions are not the best solutions. And that's what we all ought to be as leaders.
Yeah, it's amazing that you had that in the military. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. They use in the Bible a lot, haughty. I love that. The fact that live in harmony with one another. This is Romans 12:16. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. For me, it's just full of it. We got people around. You can call it whatever you want, because I think a lot of people hear that pride. It's one of the deadly sins, and they're like, well, wait a minute, what's wrong being proud of my son or proud of my dad? That's a totally different type of pride. It's when you take pride in yourself. And one of the things that people love about some individuals, particularly comedians and stuff, is that self-deprecation, man. When you are sincere and secure enough in your own being and in your biblical wisdom that you have no problem making fun of yourself and do it in the right form, it really brings you down to everyone else's level, and you'll find out just how much people will love you for it too. Well,
that's one of the things I share with things that I've learned over the years that I share with my grandson, and that is, there's always people out there that will bully and take advantage of anything that's going on with you, or any, physical flaw you have. If you're heavy, they'll joke. If you're too skinny, they'll joke. Whatever it is. And I said, the best way to disarm people is when you can laugh at yourself. Because, and I learned that again, somebody who was riddled with insecurity, especially in the early parts of my life, just trying to figure life out. And I recognize when people make fun of me, especially if it's funny, because, I'm somebody who loves sarcasm. I tease myself. So if you tease, you certainly got to be able to take it. But I've recognized that if you can acknowledge funny's funny, even if I'm the butt of the joke, it's a very disarming thing to be able to laugh at yourself and to win people over. They think they're hurting you, but when you laugh with them, it really is a way to take away their power to be able to hurt you.
Yeah, just be careful what you're teasing about, because a lot of times it's okay for someone to tease about themselves, but they don't want someone else doing it for them. And certainly you can see that as well. 941-1011, 941-1011. We've got a bunch of emails here that we've gotten through missionminderradio@gmail.com, and also info at Tony Kurre Radio. You can use that as well. Sting that on, and we'll continue to go through some of these emails. And we can usually do like a show about once a week just on some of the emails we get, which is fantastic. I've got one here from Tom in Birmingham. Says that he works in a law firm here locally in town, loves his job, and has evidently a very attractive young lady who is now working in the office, but questions her risque, inappropriate dress. In radio, we had a lot of that, but of course, in radio was a little different. I mean, we had bikini clubs and we had all kinds of things going on back in rock and roll radio, back in the Elvis Presley days, back in the 50s. It was nothing for us to have bikini teams and everything else. Times have changed a big time over the last 10 or 15 years. And so evidently it sounds like he's got a young lady who maybe works out a little bit, is proud of her body, and evidently if there's a bunch of men with testosterone going in a law firm, they probably all feeling good about themselves, talk about some pride, and evidently she maybe shows off a little too much or maybe brings too much attention to herself. How do you deal with something like that? I've heard that, well, I work out. I work hard on my body. I go to the gym every night, and I like to be appreciated. I don't want being gawked at or stared at, but I like the attention. And so I like to wear stuff that shows off that hard work. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a very delicate thing for leaders in organizations. So most organizations of any size will have a personnel policy handbook, and they will lay out for you kind of what the standards are. And so I've been in organizations to where it's even gone to the point to where they have pictures of here's what's acceptable, here's what's not. Things such as they try to make it as objective as possible and not subjective, because everybody's opinion, if you make it subjective about what's appropriate, everybody has a different opinion about what's appropriate.
Sure.
So you try to make it as objective as possible. And so I've seen things like, facial piercings and things of that nature. And what I've tried to explain to people, new employees that have come in, and they have different color hair. And when I say different color, I'm not talking about blonde, brunette. I'm talking about green.
Green, yellow, yeah. They look like a pair of
Yeah, pink, all that kind of stuff. I know that's very popular. Now, if I'm at a hair salon or if I'm doing whatever, those aren't big deals. Yeah, I think that's okay. I can let that stuff slide.
Sure.
But when you're in a professional environment, you don't want, where you're going to be interacting with the public, you don't want that person necessarily to be the forward-facing person of the organization, because look, let's face it. I'm not making a spiritual judgment about anybody that wears green hair.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that as a business owner, you are trying to put your best foot forward. And that person who wears green hair, and I've seen it, may be a fantastic employee, but just may have some odd choices or unique feelings about things. And so what that person has to understand, like all people, is when I come to work for an organization, I'm agreeing, okay, you're going to pay me to do this job, and you're telling me I have to do it under these circumstances. And dress code is certainly a certain circumstance. So people have to make a decision. Yes, I understand what the dress code is. Yes, I'm going to adhere to it, or I'm not going to adhere to it. And ultimately that.
How can you? So say there's somebody that, for lack of a better phrase, maybe doesn't wear undergarments, if you know what I'm talking about. And she shows up at work, and it's getting to the point where it's somewhat of a distraction, but she's doing a very good job. How do you go about having someone?
Well, that's typically an HR. Usually, what happens if somebody's bothered by it, or if a comment's made, usually the process is they're going to give it to the HR, and the HR person is going to go address it with the individual. Like, I don't know how many of our audience watched the sitcom The Office. Mm-hmm. There was Toby, and they would bring casual Friday complaints to Toby, and Toby'd have to go deal with it. That's normal. But it sounds like he may be at a smaller law firm, and lots of times where you have maybe 3 or 4 lawyers in partnership, and you're going to have.
Sounds like no one's getting anything done. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, I mean, you're going to have that. The reality is typically the managing partner, the one whose name is first or whatever, is going to have the most influence. And if that person is not bothered by it, then HR is going to follow their lead. So the question then becomes, well, what do you do if you're somewhere and it's really bothering you, but the policy is not being violated? Because if somebody's dressing provocatively, but it's not violating the policy, then what you've got is you've got your own internal conflict with what it is, and then that's where you have to make a decision. Now, I always encourage people. The first thing is to go sit down with the person who calls the shots and express to them, because the reality is, hey, man, let him be aware of it. And he may address it or give you permission to go address it. But if that person then says, well, I like it, the customers like it, whatever, then obviously the attorney then has a decision to make. Can I remain here and get past this issue and still be a productive employee? Or because of my own personal ethics or my own personal views on modesty or appropriate workplace behavior, should I look somewhere else? And that's ultimately, lots of times, it just comes down to people's choices about.
Yeah, sometimes it's the people around too. It's the creeps, quite frankly. I mean, we certainly live in a much different time now than we did back in the dress code days. We were mentioning Elvis Presley and not showing the camera below the waist. Certainly times have changed a lot. But I would say this, in coming from radio where, golly, my 22nd birthday, I had a dancer in the studio. I mean, it was right there. I mean, it was go time. And so, read the room, know where you work, right? I mean, if you're working for a radio station or you're working for a bar or something, if they lights, things are going to be a little more lax than they would be if you're working at a law firm. And my daughter hates the fact she can't show shoulder or belly. Well, good. That's great. I'm glad Oak Mountain's got a dress code, and I know why they have a dress code. I'm not real crazy, about the faux skirts and the things that some of the other young ladies wear at school. But there's a dress code for a reason. And the other thing is, if you're causing a distraction, there's something going on. You know what I mean? If it's causing a distraction for maybe 1 or 2 people, I can get that one thing. But if the whole crew, particularly a law firm filled with men, is having an issue with distractions, like they can't stop going to the coffee maker because she's there again, then maybe there's something to be said there. Just from a litigation standpoint, just be careful where you go. I think that's interesting. Tabby in Birmingham wants to know, how do Michael and Tony deal with children with potty mouths? And And this is going to be by the way, if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is Mission Mind. Keep your mind, your mission, your mind. It's a business show with a biblical slant or a Bible show with a business slant, depending on what day of the week it is. But I can remember growing up in school. I was in first and second grade, and there was a kid named Scott Madonna. I never forget him, Scott Madonna. Scott Madonna was the one that was the first kid who came to school that said a bad word. And, of course, I was like, no way, I can't believe Scott just said that. And, of course, we'd sit in the corner and say it as many times as we possibly could because it was fun to say. And, of course, I did a really good job at keeping those words out of my potty mouth when I got home in front of my mom and dad. Little did I realize that I ended up doing a job where I couldn't say those things at all. We always say any mic is a hot mic. No matter what you've got, if you got a microphone around, pretend it's always on because that way you don't have to worry about saying. People would go, man, I've heard you speak, like you're in the armed service, and I'm sure you did too. I can only imagine some of the stuff you heard when you were in the armed forces, and then you get on the air and you turn that microphone on, and it sounds like you've never said the S word in your life. And I'm like, yeah, well, I have slipped on occasion, but let's back it up a little bit. First of all, if you've got kids, do you discipline your children if in fact they cuss? If you do discipline, why do you, and how do you keep them from doing it again?
Well, I've raised 2 daughters and I have 4 grandchildren. Girls are in this area probably a little bit easier, although there's probably people out there going, not today, they're not. Mm-hmm. I think it's several factors that are going on. Number one, are they hearing that kind of language regularly in the household?
Yes. Yeah.
And for part of that is it's very difficult to say, oh, well, this is appropriate for an adult, but it's not appropriate for a child. You have to understand, children do not have typically have the ability to navigate nuance, and so they're like, well, daddy says it or mama says it. And so when you have those kind of behaviors, you typically model that. Now, look, I remember doing the same thing. Either I can't remember if I was saying it, heard it from my dad or other kids. When you start learning, we called them dirty words and all that, and there's almost like an excitement to share that with your friends, and it's almost like, hey, we're discovering something new, and that can be really tough to fight against. But I think, like most things, when it comes time to deal with these kind of things, is the more open we are in having conversations with our children, it may not fully solve it in the moment, but the more conversations you can have, the more the long-term effect I think it'll be in planning the values that you want. Let me say this. I remember one time my youngest daughter, was very, very inquisitive. She was 6 years old, and she would not stop asking my wife where babies came from. And so, the old stork thing wasn't flying anymore. She wanted to know, and she was just grilling. And my wife came to me. She's like, well, maybe if I just tell her a little bit. So she revealed a little bit, and that maybe that will quench her curiosity. Well, unbeknownst to us, so she walked her through and said, when a man and woman want to have a child, they have sex, I think is how she put it, and didn't go into a lot of detail necessarily about what that was or what that meant. Well, within a week, my 6-year-old daughter's in the back seat with some neighbors, and they're going somewhere, and my daughter says, hey, Miss Debbie, have you ever sexed your husband? And she came and told us that. Well, I totally flipped out and when I flipped out, it was because I was embarrassed. I'm like, well, what is she thinking of me? And of course, I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back on it, I flipped out because I'm like, Does she think we're over here watching dirty movies with,
really.
with our children walking around? Where's that question coming from, and all that kind of stuff? But you can tell by the question, she's just trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. And I've often looked back at how much I overreacted to that. I mean, I was a very young parent, screaming, hollering, and a lot of it was because I was just embarrassed by it. I wish I would have had the emotional maturity at the time to sit down and continue the conversation and help them understand what's appropriate and what's not. And I think, especially with speech, when the Bible encourages us to use words to encourage and to build up, to show love, to show care, that when we use words that bring about bad thoughts, negative thoughts, unholy things at times, that's not what God wants us to do. And again, I'm not trying to hammer a little kid over the head and say, you're bad and you better hope God forgives you, that kind of stuff, nothing like that. But again, just begin to have a real authentic talk with them. And yes, it's awkward, but help them to understand that, yes, that's in our culture everywhere, but our culture is not seeking to glorify our Maker. And we are. And so we don't accept that as being okay in our family.
Yeah, Matthew 12:36 and 37, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. No let corrupt talking come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. That's Ephesians 4:29. I've got a serious issue, and listen, when I've been in bars and stuff, I'm like a sailor. When I get around that language, I end up emulating it. I know that sometimes they say the most sincere form of flattery is imitation, and so I guess take that as a compliment. But I try not to do that. I certainly don't try to do that around my children. I make sure that I don't drop any of the big dogs. I think I've hammered my thumb a couple of times, and maybe they've heard something, and then I apologize for it. But I'm like, do as I say, not as I do. And I try to do the best I possibly can. I do remember being like 7 or 8 years old, and I actually used the Lord's name in vain. I said, Jesus Christ. And my mom, her neck snapped around. She said, where did you hear that? And of course, I heard it from her father. I said, Grandpa, because my grandpa was an old German Brucker. His last name was Brucker, and he was an old German, and he used that. He said Jesus Christ 400 or 500 times a day. And I said, I've just got, so certainly my mom was not in a position to tell her dad to knock it off, because they had a different type of relationship anyway. But normally it is heard from somewhere else, and I can tell you this, it bothers me when I see people with videos on TikTok or whatever, and their 3-year-olds dropping F-bombs. They think that's funny. I don't think it is. I think it's disgusting. I think it's wrong. You want to be careful, and it may be funny if you're out and about. But I mean, it's, and I don't think it's the kid's fault. They don't know.
Yeah, they don't know what they're doing, especially if their parents laugh at them.
Exactly.
But I think, I think again now. She says, well, what happens? So I guess parents are saying, yeah, okay, you sit down and talk with them. What happens if they keep doing it? Well, I think there has to be, if you're teaching a value, and this applies to anything, if you're teaching a value, then you have to be able to, when talking alone doesn't work, then you have to begin to bring accountability and discipline by increasing the consequences of that behavior. So, unfortunately, when I was young, I didn't think about the full spectrum of things that were available to me as a parent. And if I told them not to do it and they didn't do it, they get swat on the behind or whatever. There's a whole myriad of things that's available to parents today, but I think as long as you're taking the time to explain so they know why. But if they, and children will do this, they'll dig their heels in sometimes, and they'll do things, especially if they're angry at a parent and want to get back at them. They know that if they say certain words or do certain things, that really inflames a parent. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So I think understanding that, making it very clear, but increasingly bringing about consequences until the behavior begins to change, and that I leave that up to each parent to determine what that looks like.
Yeah, and as an adult too, and I've gotten in trouble for this before. But man, be careful when you're in someone else's home. I mean, if you got together and maybe the kids haven't gone to bed yet, and you got a group of adults, you're getting together to watch a football game or whatever. It's amazing to me how often I've been to ball games with my son, and at the time he was 8, 9, 10 years old, and I'm with a friend of mine who's just got potty. And I'm like, dude, my son's sitting right here. Chill out. What's up with the. So be careful what you say around other kids too. That's something another time where you can read the rooms. Jonathan in Northport wants to know, what is Michael Coleman's thought on CEOs of nonprofits who make a lot of money? There's this thought process that just because you're in a non-for-profit, you're not supposed to make any money. That's not true, particularly when you're bringing in a lot of money. I know there's several people. I had a friend of mine that was working for, I'm not going to mention the organization, but was making $350,000 a year at a non-for-profit. And you're like, well, how's that possible? Well, he was bringing in $3 million a year. He was bringing in, and he was giving a lot of his money back to the organization. So there was a reason why he did that. It was well worth the money. Consequently, they brought in someone for half as much, and they didn't bring in half as much money, and the organization didn't do quite as well. So, it depends, I guess, on who's running the organization and who's a CEO. But listen, we'd all like to think that if you're in a non-for-profit, you're like an apostle. No one's getting paid anything. We're just doing it for free, and no one's asking for anything. But let's be real here. If you're going to be bringing in somebody in, you're running a board. And obviously you're bringing in board members who obviously have connections as well, financial and otherwise. That's important to a non-for-profit. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I deal with this particular thought or particular attitude. And to be honest with you, when I first stepped into the nonprofit realm, I shared some of those same feelings. And first of all, let me explain. One of the things that I talk about in nonprofit, and I coach other nonprofits and do training for them. And one of the things I struggle with, you'll probably hear me say several times throughout the upcoming weeks of this show, when I talk about nonprofits, is I get very frustrated at the mediocrity that's found in nonprofits, and it's because. And the biggest mistake we as nonprofit leaders make is that we don't run a nonprofit like a for-profit business. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we have $1 million budget, and the vast majority of that is either from a national organization or from the government or whatever to do a certain amount of services. And I've seen leaders who come in and go, yeah, we just keep doing this every month. They're not really seeing how to do it more efficiently, more effectively, to make a greater impact. It's not because they don't care, but they're just like, hey, I'm the captain. I'm just guiding this ship. I'm not looking to do anything risky or whatever. And so what happens is you'll have a board. Oftentimes, in most nonprofit boards, we're not talking about national boards where they have high-level executives from around the country, like a Red Cross or Feeding America or things like that. I'm just talking about your average community board of people who are great people, who care about their community. They want to do good, but aren't necessarily trained and skilled in nonprofit management and overseeing that. So you get somebody that's got a wonderful heart, and they go over a nonprofit, and they're like, yeah, that person's going to be perfect, but they have zero business acumen. And so what ends up happening is you're like, well, we're really struggling financially. But I mean, half our money comes from fundraising, and this person doesn't know how to fundraise. Well, it's because you're treating it like, they're coming in going, yeah, I can make sure the programs are administered. They're not driven necessarily to excellence in everything. I've said I run our food bank as if there's a competing food bank across the street. and people have a choice as to which food bank, and I'm trying to win their business. So that's from a customer service perspective, but also from, having the right food, having the best produce, having all, just like a grocery store would. And so I'm trying to run that and do that as efficiently as possible, while also dealing with donors and helping donors understand their relationship and the impact they can make, and volunteers and logistics and on and on and on. Well, what I found out is that people out there with a certain skill set who can come in and do those kind of things are not a dime a dozen. And I've gotten into some nonprofit work and done some things where for years I took less money, especially when I started a nonprofit, and I started it with my own savings because I was very motivated to get this off the ground. And I took an incredibly low salary for many, many, many years without any benefits, just so the Hope Inspire Ministries could continue, so it could survive. Mm-hmm. But when you're asking somebody to come in and take over, for instance, like a food bank, where you're dealing with donors, you're dealing with governmental contracts and audits, you're dealing with customer service issues, you're dealing with transportation, other logistics, on and on and on. I mean, you have to bring in somebody who not only has the capacity to deal with all that, but excel in that. And so, because those people are not a dime a dozen, lots of times you have to bring people from industry over into the nonprofit to get that level of excellence. And you're like, well, we may have to invest more money, but the result is you're going to have a much better product because you're paying money to bring somebody in that has a skill set. And I think it's a mistake to think that because somebody wants to work in a community and make a difference in that community, that they somehow have to take a vow of poverty to do that. Let me give
they don't.
Let me give an example that's related to this. So when I thought for a long time, I was very passionate about ministry, and I only understood ministry in the context of preaching or teaching. And so when I retired out of the military, before I got into the nonprofit world, I was leading a small congregation, about 100 people in our town. It was a very small town, people I'd known for years, knew the families for years. And so when you come into situations like that, and I began to be introduced to other preachers in our fellowship who were 70 and 75 years old who were still preaching. And I was like, are you still preaching because you're passionate about preaching? No, I'm still preaching and looking for opportunities to fill in because my Social Security is not enough. And for all those years I was a preacher, how they used to hire was they'd come in and say, okay, we want to hire you. What do you got to have? Well, the least I can take is this. Okay, we're going to pay you that. And they didn't pay into retirement. They didn't pay. Lots of times preachers didn't choose Social Security, on and on and on. So that vow of poverty, all it did was cripple that person later on as they got in life. And I think most people understand they want a quality. If you're going to do a service for a community or for people in need, you want it to be done right. You want it to be done effectively. You want it to be done efficiently. And you want your donor dollars to be stretched and to be maximized. And to bring somebody in that has that can do that and bring about a return and increase the amount of money coming in, it's like, okay, if I had to pay somebody an extra $50,000, but they're going to bring in an extra $500,000, so for every dollar it cost us, they're going to bring in, just multiply that times 10, then you have to say, well, doesn't that make sense to do that? But for so long, people have, and I'm not saying this person who sent this in at all was doing it from a judgmental perspective. But there are a lot of people who go, well, I'm not going to donate. Do you know what they pay their CEO? Well, the question is, what is their CEO returning? What's the rate of return versus what we're pouring into this person? And I think that's for every board to figure out is that CEO being effective for what we're paying them? And yes, it was something I had to navigate through. Yes, I had all those questions, but I've landed on not guilt that I make a good salary. Now, let me say this as well. Because I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, the average CEO salary across Feeding America, due to the complexity and all that they do, is over $200,000. Does Michael make close to $200,000? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Does Michael make less than his peers in the state of Alabama itself? Yes, absolutely. Does Michael make a good living? Yes, I do. So I'm very thankful. I don't get into comparing myself to what other people make or what other people do. Feeding America puts that out every year, but I make enough to be able to pay my bills, put money away for retirement, which is getting ever closer at age 60. But I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that whatever dollar spent on me, that I'm working that much harder to make the food bank better, to deliver more pounds of food to those out there, and to care for our community.
I get this feeling you're never going to be retiring, man. Because when you love what you do, you don't ever work a day in your life, Michael. That's for sure.
And I do love it.
Hey, we got a few, like I told my kid, I'm 60 and I had to kind of start all over again in my 50s, and I've been super blessed that God has given this opportunity to start all over again. I'm kind of glad I got to start over again in my 50s and not my 70s.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of friends of mine who are now retiring, and I'm like, and they're all going off and buying themselves an RV and going hunting and doing whatever they want for the rest of their lives, and I kind of got a little covetous in my life, and I kind of felt horrible about it. And I told my son, I'm kind of getting tired of hearing about all my friends retiring and having the cash to do so. And he said, Dad, you never worked a day in your life. He said, you've been retired since you're 12. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I work my, He goes, yeah, but you love what you do. He said, if you were retired, what would you be doing right now? I said, probably talking to Michael Coleman on Mission Money. I'd be doing the same thing. Hey, we only have a couple more minutes real quick. Do you, this is from Tim, do you believe in the adage, the customer is always right? And if they're not, how do you deal with it? We got about 4 or 5 minutes because I want to leave a couple minutes at the end. Go.
As a general rule, I know what that's saying. I would say usually the customer is not right, but I try to be as accommodating as possible. That goes right back into leading with, with integrity and biblical wisdom. Somebody comes to me and I cannot begin to share with you the number of times that our partner agencies, I've had their representative come in there knocking on my door and raising all sorts of cane because what they thought should happen didn't happen. And so there's times where I usually do this, invite them in, sit them down, and the very first thing I want to do is listen. Okay, tell me what's going on from your perspective. And they vomit everything out, usually very emotionally, and then I go back to talking to my staff and find out what's happening. And more times than not, sometimes we're wrong, and when we're wrong, I'm like, I'm going to make this right. But there's been times to where I've had partner agencies where the rep from that agency, so it's another nonprofit who comes and picks up food from us and raising all sorts of cane, and I've called them in and said, this will be the last time you raise your voice to my staff, or this will be the last time you kick up a fuss about this. So what I think is important is I'm always open to the perspective that I could be in the wrong. And if I'm ever in the wrong, or if my staff, when I say me, I'm including staff, operations, everything about the food bank. If we are wrong, then I'm going to do whatever I can. If somebody calls me and says, hey, we got this meat from you, and when I got over here, it's got a funny color. And I said, all right, tell me how much meat you got from us, and I'm going to give you a 100% credit. Because I want to, that's kind of the idea of, well, the customer's right. You don't have to send me pictures. If you say it's not right, I'm going to make it right. Yeah. Because I think that builds credibility with me. However, inevitably, you're going to have people and customers who abuse that. And are like, well, every time I raise a fuss, they give in and do this. And there are times where you have to draw a line and say, we very much value what you do. I want to continue our relationship, but I'm not willing to continue our relationship on these terms. So for us to move forward, this is going to have to be the last time I'm dealing with you about your attitude. Now, if you have a question, of course you're free to come ask it. But this is the last time I'm going to deal with you with a raised voice. And because, look, just like I care about our customers, I care about our employees. And I cannot subject them to the whims and the abuse and the bad moods of people coming and picking up food from us. So it's not a hey, I'm going to go by this. The customer's always right, but I'm going to be open to the fact that I'm wrong, but also understand that I have to protect the integrity of the organization, protect the integrity of our employees, and any abusive situations. And so it's really a case-by-case scenario.
Yeah, and I also think it depends on how successful your business is. I mean, if it's the opening night, by the way, I wanted to mention this, and I reached out to them to do some business here with Mission Minded, this new chicken place called Cane's. You know what Cane's is?
Yeah,
it's called Raising Cane's.
There's a great story out there about how that whole franchise came about.
Yeah, it opened up on Highway 280, I guess, a couple weeks ago. And my daughter, I think there's a Cane's in Clemson where my son goes, and she had it there, and she talked about it. I'm like, how different can a flipping chicken finger be? I mean, you know what I mean? And I kept thinking to myself, from a business standpoint, from a business owner, a small business, I'm thinking to myself, okay, whenever I see a new business, I always think to myself, what do you say to an investor? What would you have said to this investor to say, listen, I want to start a new restaurant, and it's going to sell chicken fingers. And they're going to look at me like, dude, there's like 75 places out there that are already selling chicken fingers. What makes your place different? Well, I pulled up the other night, and I had to actually sit on Highway 280. That's how far back the drive-thru was. It was amazing that people were willing to actually wait 45 minutes. And I will give them kudos. If you're going to start a franchise, normally a franchise will allow you to take a bunch of customer service reps from other stores to come in, so it's running really nice the first few weeks you got it there, so you don't have some of the issues you'd have when you're opening a brand new restaurant. And they certainly did that. And I mean, it took me 35 minutes to get my chicken fingers, but I will say it was brisk and it was done very, very well. So if you're looking to go check out Raising Cane's, go out there. I stopped and dropped off a package and said, we'd like to raise some cane too and do it with Jesus. So if you're interested in being on some Christian radio, man, come out to Mission Minded. And so they took the package, but they had it going on, brother. I mean, it was 2 lines and it was one after another, and they were good. Order was correct, and so I had to give them some credit there. So it was pretty good. But again, I'm thinking to myself, what in the world could you possibly do to get investors? And again, when you're talking about something that is already successful, like Raising Cane's is, that probably is the best thing to put in front of an investor. Hey, listen, here's our growth from years 1 to 5, and would you like to be a franchise in that? So I could certainly see what that is, but. Kudos to Raising Cane's. Now, come spend some money on Mission Minded with us. We'd love to do that. All right, we'll do it again tomorrow on a Tuesday edition. This week, we're getting into biblical wisdom and leading with that. And we'll have some more of your emails. Please keep those coming here. Info at TonyCurryRadio.com or missionminderradio@gmail.com. Send those to us and check out our website. And we'll do it again tomorrow night for Andrew Barker and the entire crew back there at 101.1 The Truth. We appreciate you. Michael, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you as well, and thanks for all our listeners out there. Give us a shout out. Let us know you're listening, and we'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, 941-1011, 941-1011. We'll always stop the show to take a phone call, 941-1011. Until then, God bless. Have a great night.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.